Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are on a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com.
Hey, this is Kurt Angle, and welcome to the Kurt Angle Show. First off, I'd like to thank all the listeners for making our podcast one of the top-rated podcasts in the nation. We're very grateful. We have an excellent show planned for you today. We're going to be covering Wrestlemania 17, my match with Chris Benoit, and everything leading up to it. But first, I'd like to introduce to you my co-host, the man who exemplifies the three eyes every single day, Conrad Thompson. How you doing today, Conrad?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you. I'm fired up for the show.
Man, I am too. WrestleMania 17 is the talk of everybody right now. People still think it's the biggest WrestleMania ever. And we just had the 20-year anniversary. It went down on April 1st, 2001. Does it feel like 20 years ago, Kurt? It doesn't to me.
Oh, time flew by very quickly. I'm surprised it's been 20 years, but it has been.
The Astrodome in Houston, Texas was packed that day. 67,920 fans. We had about a $3.5 million gross at the gate. It does a buy rate for 2.08. So that's an estimated $13.3 million, roughly 900,000 buys, an all-time record for a wrestling pay-per-view. When you think back to WrestleMania 17, do you remember it being one of the biggest shows you were ever a part of?
Oh, without a doubt, especially at that point in my career. It was definitely the biggest show I've ever been a part of. And it had a lot to do with the main event being Rock versus Austin. Two of the biggest names in the business were going to go at it at that time. And I think that, basically made it even extra special.
It's pretty remarkable to think about this gate here. $3,530,905, the largest for a pro wrestling event anywhere outside of Japan. It more than doubled the previous record of WrestleMania 5. Did you know going in this was going to be the all-time record, or is that not something that the guys even really talk about back then?
We didn't talk about it much back then, but I'm actually not surprised it was the biggest gate. It was a stacked card. It was a really awesome lineup, so it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, when you look at this roster, I mean, it's unbelievable. And of course, JR had a lot to do with that. He reminds us that he signed a lot of this Hall of Fame roster.
He did. It's
the event itself, the Astrodome, we've seen footage behind the scenes as fans where guys get to the building early. I think usually call time is 12 or 1 o'clock or something like that. And then you get to walk down the ramp. You get to walk out to the ring. People are still putting the final touches on the presentation before they open the doors for fans. But what's your reaction walking out there and looking around and seeing, holy cow, this isn't like an arena. This is a dome and it's going to be packed. And this is something else.
It was the first stadium I ever performed in my whole entire life. So I was overwhelmed. I kept imagining when my music played, 70,000 fans would stay on their feet and scream. And that happened. I was really surprised. It was so overwhelming. It sent chills down my spine. Really exciting.
Is this something that you would invite a bunch of family to? I mean, it feels like a major moment in your life to be on a card like this in an event this big with this many fans. Are you inviting, cousins and aunts and uncles and all that to a show like this?
You know what? Ironically, my family didn't go to any events. My extended family, I never had them there unless it was in Pittsburgh. But that would have been the type of WrestleMania I should have invited them to. I asked them to come, but they didn't want to travel, and so I understood that and respected that.
As we head into this WrestleMania, there's a lot going on. ECW is going to fold. We know that all of a sudden we see Paul E doing commentary with JR because Lawler had walked out. That left an opportunity for Paul Heyman. So a lot of the ECW folks who are on that roster, who were probably behind on pay and a little frustrated and nervous about what the future may hold, see their fearless leader strut his ass down the ramp, and now he's going to do commentary. And then just a few days before this show, WrestleMania 17, WCW runs their very last Nitro, and it's announced that Vince McMahon had indeed purchased World Championship Wrestling. So there's a lot of things going on in the wrestling world, but also for Vince McMahon outside of wrestling. The XFL is running, but not exactly lighting the woods on fire. It's not doing great. Bob Costas has a show on HBO at the time, reaches out to Vince, and to my surprise, Vince agreed to do the interview, and it didn't go well. It was almost a gotcha interview, I think is what they call it. I know you weren't there for that interview, but have you ever had an interview where you think you're going in to promote one thing and then the guy just sort of goes off into left field into territory you really don't want to be talking about?
No, it never happened to me, but it definitely happened to Vince. And whether Vince was being the real Vince or the character Vince, he raised a lot of eyebrows. And
Yes.
that draws ratings. It says, holy crap, this guy's crazy.
Right.
I need to know who this guy is and what he's about. So if you're a non-fan, it might have turned you off, but a lot of fans, I think, it drew them to Vince, to the company. So I think that what he did was effective, and Vince would do that things periodically. Every once in a while he would go off the deep end and do his crazy character Vince McMahon.
Yeah, he did here and got a lot of attention for himself. He would have a few of those HBO interviews over the years, and I'm sure we'll talk about those. Let's talk about somebody else, though. Brock Lesnar actually appeared on Wrestling Observer Live just a few days before this WrestleMania, and at the time, Brock's not a part of the WWE. He does tell the story where he was approached his junior year by Ross, and a lot of people are talking about, hey, maybe there'll be an opportunity for him in wrestling. I think at one point, the Shamrocks were trying to convince him that perhaps he should go into MMA. Were you watching Brock's amateur career? Were you keeping up with what he was doing in the NCAA?
Yes, I followed Brock in college. I thought he was a dominating heavyweight. I think he only had 2 losses his last 2 years in college, and he was really talented. He was one of the most dominating heavyweights in history. So he had an excellent career.
When you're watching a guy like that in the amateurs, NCAA do really, really well in college, does it cross your mind, hey, maybe I should reach out to that guy and talk to him about pro wrestling? Or is it such a different animal that maybe doesn't cross your mind?
Well, you don't know if you can approach wrestlers. A lot of them are turned off by pro wrestling because pro wrestling gets more of the limelight than amateur wrestling. So there's a little bit of a, I guess, negative persona about pro wrestling and amateur wrestling. But I didn't approach Brock because I was told that Jerry Briscoe was recruiting him, and Jerry would go around and travel to amateur wrestling events and try to recruit athletes for WWE, and he's the one that actually brought in Brock.
Did Jerry ever approach you when you were an amateur wrestler?
No, he didn't, but Vince McMahon approached me right after the Olympics and made me that first offer. And when I turned it down, I'm sure Jerry thought I wasn't interested, so he never tried to contact me again until I approached the company again 2 years later, and we made a deal then.
On the way to WrestleMania 17, you're working some main events, including at Madison Square Garden. It's a packed card. We would see Undertaker and Kane and Steve Austin take on Triple H, Big Show, and Kurt Angle. Was the Garden still special to you? And did anybody ever, make the approach and say, hey, this is Vince's backyard. This is family to him. Do you get that sort of speech when you're working early Garden shows?
Yes, the Garden was very sacred. Whenever we would go there, whether it was a house show, TV, or pay-per-view, it had to be a pay-per-view type of match. You had to put everything into it because this was WWE's home. And Vince McMahon put a lot of investment in New York City and Madison Square Garden. That's where the company started, and that's what Vince wanted.
It's going to be quite the show here. But before we get there, talk about the good stuff. Let's talk about some bad stuff. Unfortunately, the company makes some news when there's a group outside of the headquarters there in Stamford protesting, saying that wrestling has been overly aggressive, and they're pointing to some cases where kids were trying to emulate what they were seeing on TV. And unfortunately, some of those kids wound up in a bad way as a result. This is also around the same time that, the Attitude Era is kicking off, and obviously with all the suck it chants, and you've got Vince making Trish get on all fours and bark like a dog, and you're creating the Kiss My Ass Club. Did you have we've heard from guys like Goldberg who thought that, this wasn't his sort of entertainment. He didn't agree with the direction, that it was becoming more adult oriented. Were you for that, or did you sort of understand that wrestling was changing?
I wasn't for it, but I understood it, and I knew that wrestling was changing. I knew the Attitude Era made everything different. Vince McMahon became more risky. He took a lot more chances, did a lot of crazy stuff, and it drew ratings. I mean, the Attitude Era was the top-rated era in the company's history. So what he was doing was working. So I understood why they did it. I didn't agree with it, but I understood.
Do you remember there being a time where you were approached about an angle like that, of that nature, and you thought, "Hey, I appreciate you thinking of me, but that doesn't really work for me"? Was there an idea that you had to turn down, but just because you thought it was maybe over the line?
No, they didn't really have me do anything too crazy, but my angle with Booker T and Charmel, I wasn't comfortable with, and I still did it because they wanted me to. But I actually wish I wouldn't have done that. I didn't think it did anything for my character. It might have drew a little bit of heat, but it wasn't good heat. It was pretty bad heat. So other than that, I didn't regret anything else I did, and I didn't turn anything.
As you and I are recording this, today is the 20-year anniversary of the very last Nitro, March 26th. And we know that Shane showed up at Nitro that night, but back in Cleveland, supposedly, Vince held a meeting with all the talent, sort of explaining to all the wrestlers that, hey, yes, the rumors are true. I've bought WCW, but you don't need to worry because your jobs are safe, and the grosses will be higher than ever because now we've got interpromotional matches. I know you never even probably flirted with the idea of going to WCW, but you knew who they were and what they were about. Do you remember that meeting in Cleveland, and what the sentiment amongst the guys was about this acquisition?
Yes, I mean, with Vince McMahon, you can believe almost everything he says, but not 100% everything. So, the wrestlers, I think the undercard and mid-card wrestlers were a little bit concerned about their spots because WCW went out of business. Vince bought them. We dominated the competition, and they were coming to the WWE, a lot of these popular wrestlers from WCW. So thank God they did the brand split at that particular time, separated Raw and SmackDown. It made more openings for more wrestlers because you can only perform on one of the shows. But yeah, for a lot of the undercard and mid-card wrestlers, it was a pretty stressful time.
Do you remember, anybody in particular sticking out in your mind? If you had to think back to that day, anyone in particular being excited about the acquisition? I understand that everyone could be nervous, but was anyone, oh man, this will be great because I get to wrestle so and so, or we could do big business with such and such?
I think a lot of the main event talent was thinking that because they had their job secure, and they did want to do programs with wrestlers from WCW that they never had programs with. So I thought, for me, it was exciting. I was pretty excited about it. I was happy that a lot of these wrestlers were coming up that I could perform with.
Was there anybody in particular on the WCW side that really stood out to you that you thought, man, I could have a good match with that guy?
Booker T.
Yeah.
He was so talented, gifted, entertaining, funny. He had the whole package. He was an exceptional wrestler.
Let's talk a little bit about the promotion for WrestleMania 17. There once upon a time was a great show on TSN called Off the Record, hosted by Mr. Landsberg, and they had an all Canadian panel show with Val Venus, Chris Jericho, Edge, and Christian. And then the day of WrestleMania, they aired an interview with you. Do you remember the interview with Michael Landsberg, and what can you tell us about that experience?
Yes, it was a great interview. We talked about the Olympics, talked about WWE. It was really awesome to be on a show that was that popular in Canada. It was a major network show. It was a huge show on TV, and being a part of it made me feel very special. Like, and at the same time, wrestling is really, really popular in Canada. So there's a lot of demand for wrestling, and I think that's why Michael Landsberg interviewed me for WrestleMania.
Let's talk a little bit about the Ross Report. On March 26th, Jim Ross would say that you're the most talented performer he's ever been around with your level of experience. And Meltzer would even comment on that, saying, quote, I can't come up with anyone to dispute that. There are guys who were 2 years in who were very close in the ring, but I'm not even sure naturals like Owen Hart or Jun Akiyama or even Kenta Kobashi at 2 years in had his polish in the ring, and none had his presence, charisma, or interview ability. It's so ridiculous to label someone as a probable all-time great with this little time in, but barring an injury, I think it's as close to a lock as could possibly be possible. I mean, he's putting you over in a major way here, not just Meltzer, but Jim Ross. Is any of that stuff on your radar at all, or are you just making towns at this point?
I was just keeping my nose to the grindstone and staying focused and staying humble. I did hear the praise that was given to me by Meltzer and Jim Ross, and I appreciated it. It made me feel really good. It made me feel like I was on the right track, and I knew I still had a lot of work ahead of me, so I wasn't finished.
We've never really talked about it, but when do you first learn who Dave Meltzer is? Does someone bring you the newsletter in the locker room, or how does his name first come up as best you recall?
The wrestlers would talk about him, hey, Meltzer said this or Meltzer said that. And I was like, who's Dave Meltzer?
Right.
I didn't really know. And I found out quickly, he has a lot of influence with the internet and the WWE universe and all the fans of wrestling. So I know he's been doing it for years, and he's actually pretty good at it.
Yes, he is. Let's talk about access. Fan access was a huge success from the WWF standpoint here. The place was absolutely mobbed. There were some negative reviews saying there were actually too many people there, and that the autograph lines could be hours. And they're monetizing the experience in a new way. I think fans could spend $300 and eat ravioli with Big Show, or pay $200 and get a sock from Mick Foley. What'd you think of the fan access event? Is this your first time doing something like that?
Yes, and it was overwhelming. It was definitely overcrowded, very uncomfortable, but you have to do it for the fans. It's fan access. WrestleMania is once a year. You have to show the fans your appreciation for them. So, it's crazy because the company was trying to make money any way they could, eating ravioli with Big Show and, Mick Foley, getting Mick Foley's sock. It was just like they were just stealing money from the fans left and right. It was just crazy. It's incredible how they come up with ideas of how to make money.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about the build to the big event here. The March 1st SmackDown opens with you. You've got a ton of heat. The crowd is all chanting Angle sucks. You wind up calling out Stone Cold or The Rock, either one. And then the glass breaks, and Austin says something like, if you want me to whip this city slicker's ass, give me a hell yeah. And of course, you're in the main event that night with him. 3 years earlier, you were a fan of Stone Cold, and now here you are working with him. What must that have been like?
Well, Austin's the reason I got in the business. I fell in love with him in 1998. I wanted to be him. I wanted to be like him. I loved this character. When I decided to join WWE, my idea was being another Stone Cold Steve Austin. Little did I know I was going to be the complete opposite. I was going to be a nerdy drinking heel, Olympic gold medalist that, just talked about the three eyes and stupid shit. So it was a dream come true to actually wrestle Austin for the first time, and so very short, very little time in my career that I actually got to wrestle him. I didn't expect to wrestle him this quickly, but it was awesome. I really enjoyed it. And he's an excellent worker. I mean, his character is so strong. People underappreciate his in-ring ability. I mean, Austin's the beer drinker, flip off your boss, beat your boss up, rebel. And fans took to that very quickly, but his in-ring skills were just as good.
The next week on Raw, you snap. You break Scotty 2 Hotty's ankle in the opening few minutes of Raw, and backstage you tell Kevin Kelly you're tired of being The Rock and Stone Cold's whipping boy. A few days later on SmackDown, you tell Kevin Kelly about your vicious streak, and you're disappointed you didn't break Scotty's ankle faster. And in 1996, you had your neck, that you would have broken it in half the time. And the late Brian Christopher tries to attack you, but Tess holds him back. You wind up in a match with him instead, and you dominate. And the commentators keep talking about how you've snapped. And then you hit the moonsault and wind up winning. And of course, Grandmaster Sexay tries to attack you. You put him in an ankle submission too. We're starting to get a harder edge to the Kurt Angle character here, right?
Yes, they wanted to make me more aggressive, more dominating, and especially in a match like that. When you work with a very successful tag team partner, but when they split up the tag team or use one of the tag team partners to wrestle a main eventer, it's an enhancement match. So the main eventers can be a lot more aggressive and dominate the match more. It's to help make the main eventer even bigger. And that's the type of match that we had that night.
Let's keep the build going here. I also want to mention that there was a report in the Observer that says Test upped his stock greatly with his SmackDown match with Angle. Did you hear that? That people were giving him high fives and kudos afterwards. A great match, Andrew. Or are they coming to you and saying, "Hey, man, great job out there with Test"?
Yeah, I had a lot of compliments about the match, and I understood why that it did wonders for Test's career because, I was main eventing at that particular time, and he was an upcoming talent, and we had a really great competitive match, and I think I did up his stock.
The next episode of Raw, you have a rematch for the world title against The Rock, and in your interview, you say it's a crime that you haven't had a rematch for a title that you held for 5 months, which is longer than most marriages last here in Los Angeles. You also say you're going to snap The Rock's ankle, and it's pretty notable because you're starting to talk about the ankle lock a lot here in interviews. You got it over in a major way, breaking it on Scotty 2 Hotty, and now it feels like this is going to be a new era. We're moving out of the Olympic slam and into the ankle lock era here. Is that by design, or is it one of those things that it just evolved?
It was by design. That was the whole reason I in a work aspect broke Scotty's ankle. Scotty,
Right.
They wanted me to be more of a submission specialist, more of a technician, and more of a killer. And I had to adapt and learn to be less defensive and more offensive, and that's what I had to do.
You come out that night against The Rock with both of the straps on your singlet already taken down. This is something we would routinely see you do in the middle of a match, much like Jerry Lawler before you, sort of when you drop the strap, we're kicking it into a new gear, but you come to the ring that way. Is this to show that you're taking, your title shot more seriously? I mean, they even went so far as to release a figure with your straps down like that. And it's something that your fans are asking about on this week's episode.
Yeah, it was to show that the shit was going to go down, and the match wasn't going to last long. So the straps were already down. I was pretty pissed off, and I won the world title back. That's what it was for.
There's a moment in the match here. I guess we should mention the Rock puts on the sharpshooter almost right away, but then you dominate most of the match after that. You even use a bear hug. And I don't know why, but watching that back, it really stuck out to me. We don't see bear hugs in wrestling all the time these days, but once upon a time in the 80s, it was a regular part of the routine. What's up with the bear hug?
You know what? The Rock wanted to do it. He wanted to sell the midsection, and I didn't have that many midsection, holds. So the bear hug worked extremely well, and it worked in that match incredibly well.
It's just a move that I don't think we see very often. It stuck out to me. Let's talk about the rest of the match. The that move worked, by the way. They got a Rocky chant out of it. So the bear hugs are over here in 2001. But you hit a rock bottom, or he hits a rock bottom, and you kick out. Then he hits the people's elbow and you kick out. You wind up finally getting the ankle lock, but even once he gets to the ropes, you won't let go. So you wind up getting yourself disqualified. This is a pretty big deal that I don't think we should just sort of gloss over. We're less than 3 weeks away from the biggest WrestleMania ever, and you've just totally dominated the world champion. Even if you're not in the main event of WrestleMania 17, they're making sure you're ready on the other side of that show, are they not?
That's what it was for. It was to show that I was serious. I meant business. And, after WrestleMania, I was going to be gunning for the title again. And, the match was just, the whole thing was incredible. So I was very excited about being able to be more aggressive and dominating in the match. And, Dwayne was incredible. He was very giving. So it was easy to work with him. And, to show that my character was being more serious at the time.
I also want to mention that on the March 15th SmackDown, you're up against Stone Cold in the main event. It's a no disqualification match. And if for some reason Austin is incapacitated, you get his spot at WrestleMania. So Austin's really taking it to you. Eventually you come back. You're about to break his ankle and The Rock interferes. Austin winds up pinning you. But it's interesting that even though you're not in the main event, it feels like at any point they could have just said, all right, we're going to make it a 3-way dance now, because you're in this rare air with both of those guys.
Well, I don't think they ever planned for a 3-way dance or a triple threat. I think the reason they did that was to help me keep me strong all through the program, and also to keep Rock and Austin off of each other. So I would wrestle Rock one week, and then the next week I'd wrestle Austin. It was so they didn't have to butt heads until WrestleMania. And I think that's a lot of the reason why they had me do that.
So March 19th is an interesting show. We have you and Chris Benoit scheduled in a handicap match against The Rock. And you tell Benoit, hey, put him in that move you do. Of course, he's talking about the crossface. And that'll set up my ankle lock, which offends Chris Benoit. And then Jericho urinates in Steve Regal's tea, and the storyline P, of course. So it winds up being The Rock and Jericho against you, Regal and Benoit. So there's a spot where you get both of your moves on The Rock at the same time, the ankle lock and the crossface. Regal winds up getting the pin on Jericho. What do you remember about this story? This is a fun episode.
It was a fun episode. And, Jericho peeing in Regal's tea. That was awesome. I just remember the match, it was a handicap match, I believe. And, the whole thing was to help plant the seed of Benoit and I for WrestleMania. And so we were fighting over who was going to beat The Rock. I was going to make him tap, or Benoit was going to make him tap, because he was the world champion at the time. So the story was meant for Chris and I to have a program going into Mania.
Let's keep it moving here. On March 22nd, it's once again a handicap match. This time it's you and Benoit against The Rock. Backstage, you're getting on Benoit's nerves because you can't remember the name of his move. During the match, as Benoit has the crossface on The Rock, you put Rock's foot on the ropes. Rock winds up pinning you, and then he puts the sharpshooter on Benoit, and you walk away. But after Rock attacks Mr. McMahon, you run back in and put him in the ankle lock. And this is kind of fun. I mean, this is nice storytelling here. What do you remember about that night?
Well, I didn't want Benoit to get the win, so I wanted to make sure that he didn't win the match. So I put The Rock's foot on the ropes. So Benoit had to break the hold. Little did I know I would end up getting pinned that night. But, when Dwayne attacked Vince, I was sticking up for Vince and going after Rock. And, putting him in the ankle lock was a big plus for me. So that was more of the integration of the ankle lock to show it even more, and that I was very dominating with it.
Let's talk about the big night. It's March 26th. So this is the day we're talking about where WCW has their final Nitro. You come out to do a promo and say that everybody's giddy about the big news. But the news is we're less than 1 week away from WrestleMania, and our Olympic hero still doesn't have an opponent. And you remind us all that even the freaking gobbledygooker has a match. And then Chris Benoit comes out, says he's tired of hearing you complain. And if you want a match at WrestleMania, he'll give you one. You guys agree. You wind up in a brawl, and then you're in a crossface and you're tapping. This is a nice way to get you in a match. But historically, at a WrestleMania, there's usually weeks or sometimes months of a build. What do you remember of this just 6 days before the biggest show? Did you know weeks ahead of time it was going to be Benoit? It was just a moment of a matter of waiting for that moment to be announced, or did you not know until that day?
I don't think the company knew what they wanted to do with me or Benoit, and I think that's the reason they put us together. I was in the program with Rock and Austin, jumping back and forth, wrestling them every single week. And so there was no real time for me to have a program with Benoit. I'm not sure they even thought of it till a week or two before WrestleMania. So, Benoit and I got put together because we were both top performers in the company and neither one of us had a match. And I think the company said, well, let's put the two best technicians in a match together. They're going to have an incredible match. We don't need much of a build-up, so let's just throw it on the card. So we were more of a mid-level feature, mid-card feature match for WrestleMania, which is fine with me. If I can wrestle Benoit at WrestleMania, I do it every year. So, he was an incredible performer.
Let's talk about that for a moment, because I'm just fascinated that they've got, the former WCW world champion, Chris Benoit here. They've got you fresh off of programs with The Rock and Triple H and Austin and, former world champion yourself. You're one of their hottest properties. And we're 6 days out, and only now are we finding out what you're doing at WrestleMania. And I think that's worth discussing. Do you think Vince was pulled too thin here between the acquisition of WCW, launching the XFL, the biggest WrestleMania of all time? It's got to be easy to divert your focus and take your eye off the ball, right?
Oh, without a doubt. I'm sure that had some effect on it. The thing is, most of the time we have matches booked months before WrestleMania. At least half the matches are booked 6 months before WrestleMania, and there's programs leading up to it. There was no program for Benoit and I. So, it's a little frustrating considering how big of names we were in the business. But I do understand it. I understood that Vince McMahon had a lot of shit going on with WCW and ECW and, the XFL. So, maybe his focus was drawn away a little bit. But, I mean, he has great writers that write for him regardless. So I just don't think they knew what they wanted to do with me or Benoit at that particular time.
Let's keep it going here. Let's talk about what happens next. We see Edge and Christian introduce you to Rhino, who says he will bleed for you. You're not sure what to think about his intelligence or his integrity, but say he's got some intensity. And then we see the simulcast with WCW happen, and we get a 6-man tag. It's Team ECK against the Hardys and Chris Benoit. It ends with Rhino goring Lita. You're knocked out of the ring and not really involved in the finish, but nothing happens related to your Benoit feud. It feels like this was sort of thrown together. I mean, it's cool to be on this simulcast and it'd be a big moment like this, and people still talk about the gore on Lita. But I don't know, man. It feels like when you've got two of the best wrestlers in the world, maybe it deserved a little more time. Were you thinking that at the time? Was Benoit saying that? Or are you just so new to the business that it's like, okay, this is what they want, let's go do it?
Yeah, I was new to the business. I just kept my mouth shut, my eyes and ears open, and did what they told me to do. So, I didn't show any influence on, I was never political and tried to push myself to do something. I always expected the company to do it. And sometimes you have to step up and say, hey, what am I doing? What are you guys going to do with me? I didn't do that at the beginning, at least not until a few years into the business. So I think that, they were partially at fault for not having programs for Benoit and I, but Chris and I didn't speak up either. And I think we're guilty as well.
Let's talk about the last stop for WrestleMania. Besides Heat, it's the March 29th SmackDown. You're in a tag team with Eddie Guerrero against Test and Chris Benoit. It's not a long match. Benoit makes Eddie tap, and then you put Benoit on the ankle lock. Benoit taps, and then Michael Cole says, Sunday, we'll find out who the best technical wrestler in the world is. And then it's show day, man. Here we are, the Astrodome. What's the atmosphere like backstage that day for the biggest show ever?
Well, it's a WrestleMania atmosphere. You know the shit is on. You know you have to put on your absolute best performance. It's a great environment. It's very exciting and also very stressful because you know you have to put on the performance of the lifetime that night. And so everybody's just trying to focus and get ready.
Does Vince or anybody with the company hold like a, I don't know, like a pep talk or rally, a big speech? Does anything like that happen on a big show like this, or does everybody there just all about business?
It's just all about business. Vince usually gave those speeches the week prior at Raw and SmackDown. He knows that we're busy that entire week of WrestleMania with everything that we're doing, going over our match, appearances, media, everything. So we don't have that speech on Sunday at WrestleMania. That's already been done, taken care of, and it's up to us to perform the best we can.
What's show day like? You know, do you have any pre-match rituals when you know it's going to be a big show? Do you eat a certain type of breakfast? Do you wake up at a certain time? Do you have any, what's the old thing? Maybe you had some superstitions. You wore a special pair of socks or anything like that?
No, I didn't have any superstitions. I just would do what I always did. You know, have a good meal in the morning. You know, I would go for a run, get nice and warmed up, loosened for the day, and go to the arena, get my gear on, say a prayer, and go out there and do what I do best.
Do you recall who your agent was for this particular match with Benoit here at 17?
I believe it was either Pat Patterson or Johnny Laurinaitis. I can't remember, but both of them are exceptional.
How would you compare the two as far as an agent helping produce a match? What was Patterson's style compared to, say, a Johnny Ace?
Patterson was more old school. He liked the old school psychology. Johnny Laurinaitis was more fast paced and new school. You know, he would come up with more innovative finishes. Pat would do more traditional finishes. So, but they were both very effective at the same time.
Let's match itself here. Meltzer would say Kurt Angle pinned Chris Benoit in 14 minutes and 2 seconds. Angle insulted the Texas crowd to make sure Benoit got a decent face reaction because the Benoit turn psychologically hasn't been handled well, and fans really haven't seen it as any kind of turn because if you pay attention, it hasn't been. They did awesome mat work early, like the best mat work in this country in years. Angle basically did all of his amateur takedowns and was tremendous in doing so and gave Benoit openings for escapes and reversals. Fans politely applauded the mat work, which was a risk because when you have such a large audience, the real wrestling fan percentage is usually low as compared to people who are just going to one show of their lifetime and they aren't going to be as into the wrestling itself as a smaller crowd would figure to be. This kept up for several minutes and the crowd still appreciated it until Angle did the subtle heel forearm and sending Benoit into the steps. Angle started suplexing Benoit all over the place, and Benoit came back with a superplex off the top rope and a rolling German suplex, and then Benoit used Angle's ankle lock on him. Let's talk about that for a minute. Whose idea was it to start with so much mat wrestling? Because all these years later, it still stands out.
Well, we had time for the match, which was very surprising considering we were more of a mid card match at the time. But you know, we basically put together the amateur wrestling. You can't really call that or you can't plan that. You know, I just told Benoit, I'll float with you. I'm gonna attack you, take you down. You know, you reverse me, I'll reverse you. We'll get up, I'll attack you again. We'll just keep the motion going. Because when you do amateur wrestling, you don't think about it. You go by action, reaction. So you react to each move that happens and you counter it. So we couldn't really talk that out. We just improvised that. We also improvised the heat. The only part of the match we structured was the comeback and the finish.
How much of that would you have laid out backstage, and how much of that is you guys just going with feel in the ring?
I'd say 60% was backstage, 40% was in the ring.
Eventually, Benoit gets a crossface and Angle needs to make the ropes, but then Angle gets a crossface and actually did a more believable version of the move than Benoit for a rope break. There was a weak and needless ref bump here. This match was getting over in a different type of suspension of disbelief manner, And the ref bump really hurt the match because it woke everyone up to the fact that they're watching essentially the same thing as everyone else on the show. The ref bump was for Benoit to get the crossface and for Angle to tap, setting the stage for Benoit being screwed. But since they were already doing that in the post-match interview, it didn't seem to serve a purpose. Angle used the newly named Angle Slam for a near fall. He went for a moonsault, but Benoit got his knees up, which actually hit Angle in the face as his moonsault positioning was off. So let's take a timeout right there. What do you think of Meltzer's criticism of the ref bump? If you had it to do over again, would you have done it the same way?
I don't know. Wrestling 101, this is what you need to do. The heel needs to make the babyface look as good as possible. The heel also has to make the babyface look like he was supposed to win. If you have a ref bump, which I don't agree with all the time, I actually don't like using them, but sometimes they're good because it shows that the babyface should have won the match. So there's psychology to it, and I totally understand why they did it. I just don't think that Chris and I needed a ref bump. We could have had the match. Whether Chris won or I won, it really doesn't matter because we're both very unique, and I don't think the fans would have been upset either way of who won or lost. It was, having two great athletes like that go at it is good enough.
Do you remember using your political power, if you will, to veto a ref bump before, or is that not something you would have spoken up about?
I didn't use a lot of ref bumps, but I used them a lot earlier on in my career, and I didn't really speak up back then. I was relatively new.
Let's talk about the moonsault. Meltzer says that the positioning was maybe off a little bit here, and you get hit in the face here. What do you remember about that?
Well, anytime I do the moonsault, I don't know where I'm going to land. So it's out of control. And I misjudged the jump and I got hit in the face with Benoit's knees. But the stuff happens. You just have to roll with it.
Next up, Benoit would use a diving headbutt for a near fall, but you get the pin out of nowhere using the tights. And Meltzer would say, this was the old Jack Briscoe, Dory Funk Jr. psychology, and that both would work a scientific match, but Funk would heel while keep the world champion wrestler credibility by showing he could really wrestle and take subtle shortcuts, which because of the context got over better than all the overt heel tactics in the undercard usually. Very similar to early Don Fry in Japan, and then in the context of a match that looks real, something simple like not breaking clean on the ropes can generate a ton of heat. And Meltzer gave it 4.25 stars. A lot to unpack here. What do you think of the diving headbutt? Wrestling fans these days play armchair quarterback about all that happened with Benoit in those last few days of his life, and they talk a lot about CTE, and they think that perhaps the diving headbutt helped contribute to that. I've never taken a top rope headbutt, much less given one, so I don't know how true that is. What do you think of the top rope headbutt? Was that a dangerous maneuver?
No, I don't think it was dangerous from a head perspective, a concussion perspective.
Right.
This doesn't really headbutt you. He just kind of lands, his face lands a little bit on your shoulder. It's not a very detrimental move. The only thing that would occur is whiplashing to your back and neck because you're landing on your stomach.
Right.
So I think that's the problem Chris had with his neck. I think had a lot to do with the diving headbutt.
What about the finish of the match? Do you remember who would have put this together? Was this your idea, his idea, perhaps Johnny Ace or Pat's?
It was Johnny's or Pat's, and it worked extremely well. It was definitely like a Funk type of match where you're a heel, and the cool thing about Funk was, he could wrestle still, but he wouldn't always do that. He would cheat to win. It was him taking a lazy way out, and I think that's why heels that actually can wrestle actually cheat, is because they want to take the easy way out, the less road traveled, and more of a rob you of the win. So that's what a heel does.
Well, it clearly worked. Meltzer giving it 4.25 stars. What do you think of that rating? Would you agree?
Well, yeah, Meltzer very seldom has ever given me anything higher than that. So I was really excited about the rate that he gave me.
You've said before that there were only a few times when you walked out of the ring and said to yourself, I nailed it. WrestleMania 21 being the time we talked about before. What were you feeling like after this match?
Honestly, I had such little experience at the time. I didn't know how to feel about it. I was relatively new. I was only on TV, I think, for a little over a year. And, I was just happy that the match was finished. I would make it through my matches and be relieved I made it through because I had such little experience. So I didn't really think about that.
Do you remember if Benoit was pleased with the match?
Yeah, he was excited. He gave me a big hug. He said that was freaking awesome. And I took his word for it. At the time, I knew the match was good. I just didn't know how good it was.
When you come back through the curtain, is it one of those standing ovation type moments? Is everybody still focused on the show because it's WrestleMania? Does Vince take the headset off and make an approach? Do you remember any of that?
Yes, Vince approached both me and Chris Benoit and said we did an awesome job that night. And he was very proud of us. So, Vince didn't do that very often, but when he got up and took his headphones off, you knew that was a good thing.
So tell me a little bit about the post match. When you leave the building that night, do you go back to the hotel? Do you do the after party thing? Are you getting together with friends or family? What's your ritual here after WrestleMania to sort of celebrate your big night?
Well, you have to go to the after party, regardless if you want to or not. But it's a lot of fun. We let loose. We have, eat food, have drinks, watch the WrestleMania that just transpired. So it's pretty cool environment, and you get to converse with, husbands and wives of the wrestlers, and it's a lot of fun. And it can last all night if you wanted to, but most of us had to get up for Raw the next day.
Well, we should mention you're not technically done when you leave the ring that night. Kevin Kelly is going to try to interview you backstage, and Benoit is going to attack you, put you in the crossface. We know that they're building towards another big match between you two, the ultimate submission match at Backlash. We're going to cover that here in a few weeks here on the Kurt Angle Show. Later that night, in the main event of WrestleMania 17, we see Stone Cold and The Rock actually get it on, and Stone Cold turns heel. This is a major moment in wrestling. In hindsight, Austin says it's either the biggest or the second biggest regret of his career. What'd you think of them turning essentially the guy who made you a wrestling fan into a bad guy?
I don't think Austin needed to turn heel. I think he was red hot as a babyface and continued to be. He wasn't getting stale. I just think that it was a move by the company that wanted to make a lot of other talent that were coming up as baby faces, like The Rock. Obviously, The Rock was already there, but myself, I turned babyface and had a program with Austin. But the match that night was incredible. I thought, you had two of the biggest stars in the business going at it. If you're going to turn heel at any particular time, WrestleMania is the best time to do it. The whole world's watching.
It is something that will be debated forever, but there's no debate. WrestleMania 17 was a critical success as well as a financial success. The readers of the Wrestling Observer gave it 99% thumbs up. That's 588 votes thumbs up, only 6 thumbs down for just 1%. The best match poll was really close. Austin and Rock got 157 votes. That historic TLC match got 120, and you and Benoit are right behind them with 119 votes. Pretty remarkable that you only had one less vote than the TLC match, which, my goodness, when you think of all the crazy spectacles that happened in that, that's pretty high praise. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, without a doubt. I was elated when I saw that vote system. The TLC match is considered one of the greatest WrestleMania matches of all time. They used so many gimmicks and they did it extremely well. It was a well planned out match, and everything was incredible in that match. And to be one vote less showed that we were just a wrestling match, straight up wrestling. It showed that wrestling, when you wrestle in the ring, it can be just as popular, just as demanded as, the gimmick matches.
Yep.
Just depends on how you do it. But the night went to Rock and Austin. They had an excellent main event. Two of the biggest names in the business going at it in the history of the business. This was a huge matchup that was highly anticipated for years. So I understand why they got the most votes. They deserved it.
Let's talk a little bit about your other match with Chris Benoit. WVM on Twitter wants to know, Kurt, what was your better match with Chris Benoit, WrestleMania 17 or Royal Rumble 2003? I'm partial to 2003 because the crowd was so invested. I feel like you guys had them in the palm of your hands. Of course, that was when the world title was on the line. But this was WrestleMania, which is obviously a whole different animal. Which match did you prefer, Kurt?
I've always said that my favorite match of all time that I've ever performed in is the Royal Rumble 2003. The structure of the match, the way we laid it out, the false finishes, the submission trade-offs, the amateur wrestling at the beginning. It was a well planned out story that was an incredible finish. Everything came together that night, and I was really excited about this match. I didn't know how good it was until I watched it back, and I was like, holy crap, this was the best match I've ever wrestled in. And to this day, it still rings true.
Let's talk a little bit about in-ring workers. Jason says, where does Benoit rank amongst most believable in-ring workers that Kurt has ever been in the ring with?
Number one.
Number one.
Yes. He's above everybody. If you're talking about just in-ring performing as a technician, a wrestler, a performer, Chris Benoit is the top. He's number one on the chart, always will be. I never faced a guy that intense, that technically sound, and that explosive in my life. He is, without a doubt, the best in-ring performer I've ever been in the ring with.
What's the downside of wrestling Chris Benoit back then? Was there one?
No, there was no downside. You knew you were going to get really tired. He goes at 120 miles an hour the whole time, man. He's an intense individual. A lot like me. I felt like I was wrestling myself whenever I'd wrestle Chris Benoit. So we'd up the ante too. We try to blow each other up. So it was an inside joke that we had to see who would get tired first, but neither one of us would get tired.
Talk to me a little bit about his chops. Is that where does he rank in terms of chops you want to avoid?
Well, Chris Benoit was an incredible worker. He had great touch, never touched you. When he punched you, kicked you, his suplexes were safe. He looked brutal, but he wasn't. He was very light. But his chops were the most brutal thing in the world. They would put red marks and bruises on your chest. Your chest would bleed. It was incredibly painful. And Chris Benoit was the man with that stuff. Every time he did it, I would squint and say, oh, God, not again. Horrible.
Here's one from Ringside Rant Jones, who says, this match is probably one of the best technical matches in Mania history. With that being said, who, in your opinion, in the current crop of talent on any roster, do you see as being one of, if not the best technical wrestler today?
Daniel Bryan, without a doubt. That guy's a technical master. I love his work. I wish I would have wrestled him. He is one of the best in-ring performers today, and I think of all time. Even though he's a little undersized, he makes up for it with his work ethic and what he can do in the ring. He is just incredible. And AJ Styles is another guy that is a great technician when he wants to be. He does some high flying stuff too. So does Daniel Bryan. But as far as technically sound, AJ Styles and Daniel Bryan are the two best.
When you wrestled a guy like Benoit, and you acknowledged earlier that you're relatively new in the business, but he's the baby face, you're the heel. We've heard typically over the years the heel would call a match. You also said that 60% of this match was probably called in the back. The other 40 is just improv. That other 40 that's improv, who's calling the match, you or him?
I was calling the match. I started, at the beginning, I was attacking Chris. So I would start the motion going. and then Chris would counter, and I'd keep going. I would counter, then he would counter. So I was taking the lead at the beginning, and during the heat, I called the heat. So I called the match, most of the match, and during the comeback and finish, we would talk to each other. We would communicate. So that wasn't a very difficult thing, but I called most of the match.
Well, next week, you guys get to call the show. We're doing Ask Kurt Anything. That's right. Ask Kurt Anything. If you want to ask a question, it's easy to do so. You just got to follow us on Twitter. It's at the Angle Pod. And I want to mention too, that we've gotten a ton of tweets over at that account where people are bragging about how much they love chicken snacks. Tell us about it, Kurt.
Chicken snacks and Snack Smart Plant Protein. This product is from Physically Fit Nutrition. They're called chicken snacks. The organic plant proteins called Snack Smart. We have 11 different flavors. This is wild buffalo and blue cheese. This is one of my favorites. Kung Po is my favorite, but this is my second favorite. Very clean, very healthy. You can get it. You can order it at physicallyfit.com. Use AnglePod code when you order.
And here's my thing about physicallyfit.com. First of all, you get to see all the different flavors, and there are a ton of different options. And we've talked about it here on the show. You actually like the Kung Pao. I think my favorite is still the Sriracha, but at the office, dude, everybody loves the buffalo flavor, and that's all at physicallyfit.com. You can even click where to order. And to my surprise, there's 3 places within driving distance here of my house. There's one that's just like 2 miles up the road, but I'm still ordering everything online. So if you're like me, scroll down to the bottom and click order now online. And there you'll see where you've got the plant protein and the chicken snacks, whatever you're looking for. And when you use that special promo code AnglePod, you save 20% off. Now, these only start at $9.99. So when you get 20% off, this is a great deal. And it's a great way to snack because this is a healthy snack, right, Kurt?
Yes, it is. It's very, very healthy for you. High protein, low carbohydrate, incredible taste. They're all exceptionally tasteful. You're going to love them.
By the way, you can also find it not only in stores near you, but Amazon.com. But if you want to save 20% off, then cruise on over to physicallyfit.com. Use that special promo code AnglePod, and you'll save 20% off. And there's no limit, so order as much as you want. It's 20% off. Speaking of no limit, there's no limit to what you continue to add to KurtAngleBrand.com. You're signing birthday cards. You're doing video messages. You're even selling cowboy hats, Kurt. What's the deal?
Selling cowboy hats, birthday cards, photos, video messages. I got the whole ball of wax and very affordable prices. My birthday cards are only $26. The photos are $31. The cowboy hat's a little more expensive, but and I also have milk cartons.
Unbelievable.
Cool. Angles milk.
Yeah, and you even take special autograph requests. That's right, special autograph requests. If you've got something you want Kurt to sign, you can make it happen over at KurtAngleBrand.com. We greatly appreciate your support. I hope you guys are digging what we're doing. We'd ask that you hit the subscribe button. Leave us a 5-star review if you think we've earned it. And most importantly, tell your friends about your favorite new wrestling podcast. It's the Kurt Angle Show every Sunday right here on Westwood One. And yes, we'll still be with you here on WrestleMania weekend. You don't want to miss it. Next week, it's our very special Ask Kurt Anything right here on the Kurt Angle Show. We'll see you next week.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.